Welcome to Whispers of Asia, a place where forgotten legends stir beneath temple stones, where prayers echo long after voices are gone, and where every shadow hides a memory waiting to be heard. Tonight, we begin with a bell, but not just any bell. This one was forged from sorrow, cast in silence, and hung where the sky meets the jungle mist. No rope swings it, no hand touches it, and yet, when it tolls, someone always dies. In a monastery hidden deep in the hills of Thailand, where saffron robes hang motionless in the humid stillness, one monk awakens to a sound that no one else hears, a low, mournful bell that calls his name. They say, when the bell rings 3 times, your soul begins to loosen from your body. They say, the last echo is not for the living. This is the story of the monk who heard the bell before death, and what it whispered when no one else was listening. Now, light a candle and listen closely, because once the bell tolls, it cannot be unheard. The temple of Wat Phai Lom rested deep within the folds of northern Thailand, where mist curled between the teak trees like a sleeping serpent, and the mountains held their breath long after dusk. It was not a grand temple. No golden spires pierced the sky, and no tourists came to offer their coins. It was quiet, and in that quiet, things ancient and unnoticed learned how to breathe. The bell tower stood near the rear wall of the monastery grounds, beyond the meditation hall, where the banyan tree leaned just enough to shade the path, as if bowing toward something older than it. The bell itself was cast bronze, cracked with time and weather, with patches of verdigris like tears trailing down its face. It had no rope, no mallet, no one rang it. And yet, just before midnight, it rang. A single toll, long, hollow, mournful. And in the kuti closest to the bell, an old monk sat up from his mat, eyes still and wide. His name was Tan Chai. He was neither the youngest nor the oldest of the temple's 32 monks, but he had walked its grounds longer than any living soul. He was known for his silence. His meditations often stretched from dawn until the sun bowed low. He had not left the monastery in 17 years, and he had heard the bell. He rose slowly, barefoot on wood worn smooth by the passing of countless feet. Outside, the night was heavy with fog. The moon was a smudge above the forest canopy, and cicadas had long since fallen silent. Tan Chai walked without urgency, as though pulled gently by a thread, toward the bell, toward the sound no one else had heard. When he arrived, the tower stood just as it always had, leaning slightly eastward, guarded by a pair of stone lions whose eyes had long since eroded into blindness. The bell itself hung still. No sway, no motion, no sound now. But Tan Chai felt it in his bones, the shiver that came not from cold, but from being seen. The next morning, the sky bloomed with a soft pink hue as dawn washed over the mountain. Monks emerged from their kutis, yawning, stretching, brushing their robes smooth with practiced grace. They did not speak much. Wat Phai Lom was a place of quiet discipline, but a murmur passed through the courtyard when Tan Chai did not join morning chanting. He was found still in his robes, kneeling in the grass beside the bell tower, his hands resting on his thighs. His eyes were open. He had not slept, but he was alive. Tan Chai, a novice whispered, touching his shoulder. The old monk slowly turned his gaze, his eyes clearer than they had been in years. "It called my name," he said softly. "The bell, it called me." The abbot, a gentle-eyed man named Pravisut, was summoned. He asked no questions at first. He merely looked at the bell, and then at Tanchai, and then he lowered his eyes. "The bell has not rung in 100 years, not since the last one who heard it." No one knew what that meant, not the novices nor the visiting monks who had come for retreat, but the way the abbot's voice dipped, how the leaves seemed to hush in their rustling, left a stillness behind that lingered longer than the morning incense. By evening, Tanchai was back in his kuti. He ate little, he chanted alone. But when night fell again, he did not sleep. Instead, he waited. He sat cross-legged, spine like bamboo, breath so slow it barely touched the air. The moon rose higher, casting silver through the slatted window, and cicadas had long since fallen silent. Tanchai walked just before midnight. The bell rang again. One low, droning note, like the exhale of the earth itself. But this time, no one else stirred. No heads turned, no birds startled, no dogs barked in the village below. Tanchai bowed his head. The bell had called only him. The next morning, he did not rise from meditation. A novice swept leaves past his kuti and paused, watching the still figure within. The old monk did not blink, did not move. Only when the chanting bell rang for the midday meal did Tanchai unfold himself, his limbs creaking like old doors. He walked to the dining hall in silence, but others noticed it now. Something had shifted. His skin looked thinner. His shadow seemed softer like smoke. His eyes, when they met yours, held the weight of water held too long in a stone bowl. That evening he stood before the abbot and asked a single question. Who else has heard it? Pravisut did not answer, not directly. Instead he guided Tanchai to the library, an old room that smelled of mold, ink, and jasmine oil, and pulled a scroll from the topmost shelf. It was wrapped in faded cloth, sealed with wax so ancient it cracked like dry leaves when touched. The abbot handed it without a word. That night, Tanchai read by candlelight. The parchment trembled under his fingers, its words faded, scrawled in a script older than his childhood. It spoke of a monk named Sangtian, who once heard the bell 3 times, and whose body was found seated upright in the meditation hall, with no breath, no wound, and a faint smile on his lips. It spoke of another, monk Preacha, who vanished after the second bell. And it spoke of the warning carved on the inside rim of the bell, a phrase no one had translated fully, but which ended with, "And the third shall return to silence." Tanchai closed the scroll. Outside, wind brushed the bell tower. The candle sputtered. He placed the scroll back on its shelf and whispered a prayer that ended not with words, but with a silence deeper than the night. The library of Wat Phai Lom was not large, nor was it arranged with the logic of a scholar's mind. It was a place of layers, layers of dust, layers of silence, layers of memory that clung to the wooden beams like cobwebs that refused to fall. Anyone who stepped inside felt as though they were intruding on conversations that had been left unfinished centuries ago. Tanchai stood before the doorway just after dawn, when the monks had completed their morning alms round and the temple grounds were still damp with dew. His robes clung slightly to his skin. The night had been restless, though he had not slept. The bell's echo still vibrated subtly in his bones, not painful, not loud, just present, like a hand resting on the shoulder of a man who did not know if he was being comforted or warned. The wooden sliding door groaned softly as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was warm despite the morning chill. Thin rays of sunlight cut through the uneven slats in the wall, illuminating swirling particles of dust like drifting spirits with nowhere else to go. The shelves sagged under the weight of manuscripts, bound palm leaf scriptures, and brittle scrolls that crumbled if held too tightly. Nothing in this room breathed except the dust and the stories. Tan Chai walked slowly, his fingers brushing the spines of old texts, teachings of compassion, sermons on impermanence, treatises on meditation. These were the surface layers, but he was not here for those. He was here for what had been buried beneath them. A faint breeze drifted through the cracked window, stirring the pages on a low table. The sound was whisper-soft, like the subtle stirring of robes during evening chanting. It was this sound that made Tan Chai pause. The pages turned again, as though bidding him forward. He approached. The table was low to the ground, ringed with cushions flattened by decades of monks who had come in search of answers rather than comfort. On it lay a single manuscript, open, waiting, though no monk had been here since long before dawn. Tan Chai sat, lowering his knees onto the cushion. The manuscript's ink was faded to a rusty brown, its pages fragile like ancient skin. He read the first lines. "There are bells meant for the living, and there are bells meant for the dying." His breath thinned. This was not a teaching he had ever been told. It was not part of the temple's recorded history, and yet it lay here quietly, as though knowing it had waited long enough. He turned the page. The brittle corner flaked off like ash. The text spoke of the chom clang, the last bell, a bell not rung by hand or rope, but by karma itself, a bell that awakened when a monk's final moment approached, calling his name so gently that only he could hear it, no one else, not even the monk beside him. The manuscript described its tone, low and sorrowful, like a mother calling a child home from across a field of fog. It spoke of how some monks welcomed it, bowing with gratitude. Others resisted until their final breath. But every one of them had heard it exactly 3 times. 3 tolls, 3 warnings, 3 invitations. He turned another page. A sketch had been drawn in fading lines, a rough depiction of the temple's bell tower. The shape was unmistakable, yet there was something more. Carved beneath the sketch were 3 names, not in Thai script, but in ancient Lana characters. He sounded them out softly. Sang Tien, Precha, Pra Cha Chawan. He knew these names. Every monk who had lived long enough in Wat Phai Lon did. These were monks whose stories were told only in murmured fragments. Sang Tien, the monk found seated upright, smiling though his chest had no breath. Precha, the monk who vanished after chanting one evening, leaving behind nothing but his robe. Chachawan, a monk whose funeral pyre would not ignite no matter how long the villagers prayed. Names that were recited rarely and only when the air was still. Tan Chai felt something shift in the room, as though the air had leaned closer. He turned another page. More names. Some crossed out, some faded, some written so lightly they barely existed. And then Near the end of the list, he saw something that made the breath in his lungs turn cold. A fresh space, a name half-inked, Tan. The rest was blank, as if awaiting completion. He closed the book gently. Outside, the sun climbed higher through the mist, but the light did not bring warmth. Tan Chai's hands trembled, not with fear, but with the unmistakable sensation of recognition. It was as though someone had begun writing his destiny in a book he had not known belonged to him. Footsteps approached the library door. The abbot entered quietly, his hands held behind his back, his expression soft but shadowed by something unspoken. "You found it," Prawisut said, barely above a whisper. Tan Chai bowed his head. "Why was I not told?" The abbot sank slowly onto the opposite cushion, lowering himself with the weight of someone carrying not age, but the burden of knowledge. "Because knowledge," he said, "does not always bring freedom. Sometimes it only brings clarity to a path that is already fixed." Tan Chai lifted his eyes. "Then the bell, it truly calls for death?" The abbot did not answer immediately. He looked around the library as though searching for words that would not harm, though he knew none existed. He said, "It calls for departure. The body ends, the mind continues. And if one does not wish to hear it?" The abbot smiled sadly. "We do not choose when the rain falls. We do not choose when a leaf detaches from a branch. And we do not choose the tolling of the bell." The candle beside the manuscript flickered. A long thread of smoke rose upward, twisting in spirals that looked almost like script, unreadable, drifting, eternal. Tan Chai closed his eyes for a moment and inhaled deeply. When he opened them again, he felt the world move around him in a slow, inevitable circle, like a wheel spinning toward a point it had always meant to reach. The abbot stood, placing a gentle hand on Tan Chai's shoulder. "Come," he said. "The day is long, but your nights will be longer still." They walked out of the library together, leaving the manuscript open on the table. Pages turned again in the faint breeze, as if a ghostly finger traced the name that had yet to be written. Behind them, dust settled slowly across the words, like a quiet shroud, preparing for what would come. The bell tower stood like a sentinel at the edge of the temple grounds, where stone gave way to soil and the jungle leaned in like a whisper that had waited too long. Birds no longer nested near it. The banyan tree, though ancient and generous in shade, kept its roots respectfully distant, as though even it knew better than to reach too close. The bell itself was massive, nearly 2 meters tall, cast in bronze so aged that it wore the green patina of time like a burial robe. There was no rope, no beam, no visible method by which it could swing, and yet it had sounded. 3 nights now. Tan Chai stood before it once again. It was just past dusk, and the light was a thin blue veil stretched across the horizon. The other monks had finished their chanting and retreated to their kutis, leaving the monastery hushed but alert, like an eye open in meditation. Tan Chai had excused himself early. The silence in his throat felt heavier each day. The bell, he feared, had begun to hear his thoughts before he spoke them. He stood at the base of the tower, staring up. The wind stirred faintly through the garden trees. Leaves shifted in dry whispers. Crickets sang their night hymns. But the bell remained still. No sway, no tremor. And yet Tan Chai felt it. a tension in the air, as if sound was coiled within the bronze, waiting only for the right breath to unleash it. He stepped forward and placed his palm gently against the bell's surface. It was warm. Not from the sun. Twilight had long since cooled the stone around it. No, this was something else. The warmth of memory, of breath. The kind of heat that lingered after someone had left a room. Thanshai closed his eyes. He breathed deeply, slow, methodical, as he had been trained for decades to do. His breath anchored him to the earth. He let his thoughts pass like clouds, but in the space between inhale and exhale, a voice came. Not spoken, not imagined, just there. A single word, his name. Thanshai. Soft, not as though whispered by another, but as though remembered by the air itself. His eyes opened. The bell had not moved. Still, the name clung to his ears. He took a step back. Somewhere in the corner of his vision, something flickered. A shadow. A figure? Gone before his gaze could fix upon it. He turned slowly, heart steady, and saw nothing but the gravel path leading back to the chanting hall. No one. Yet again he felt it. The sense of being observed, not with judgment, not with malice, but with inevitability. Like a candle knowing it is burning low. That night, Thanshai did not return to his kuti. He remained beside the bell, seated in lotus position at its base. The night air wrapped around him like a wet sheet. Fog drifted in waves from the jungle's edge, curling around the tower's legs, pooling beneath the great bell like breath in a sleeping mouth. He stayed until the sky bruised with pre-dawn color. The bell did not ring that night, but it did not need to. Its presence was enough. In the morning, the abbot found him still seated there. Prawisut approached without sound. His sandals made no imprint in the gravel. His expression was unreadable, a face trained over a lifetime not to disturb stillness. "You heard it again," he said, not as a question. Thanshai opened his eyes. No, not with ears, but with something deeper. The abbot knelt beside him, the bones in his knees popping gently. He reached into the sleeve of his robe and pulled out a small bundle, silk-wrapped, bound with a red string. With reverence, he unwrapped it to reveal a slender brass tool, shaped like a tuning fork, but older in design. He held it to the bell's side and struck it with a thin wooden mallet. A low resonance filled the air, deep, rounded, soft, and sorrowful. It was not a bell's voice, not quite. It was the prelude to a bell's voice, as if the bell were taking a breath, ready to speak. The abbot closed his eyes and listened. "It's responding," he said softly. Thanshai bowed his head. "It knows I am listening." The abbot replaced the tool and said nothing for a long while. Only the birds began to stir in the trees, and the mist slowly rose, surrendering to the day's heat. Finally, the abbot spoke. "There is a belief, older than this temple, older than even the bell itself, a belief that the final gift to a monk is not death, but clarity before death, a stillness so complete that the soul loosens gently from the flesh, like silk from water." Thanshai watched him. "And the bell?" The abbot's eyes did not move. "The bell is not death. It is the invitation." Later that day, the younger monks whispered in corners of the courtyard. They had seen Fanshai sitting at the bell tower again. They had heard the abbot perform a resonance test, something none of them had ever witnessed. They spoke in soft tones of the bell's curse, of the names scratched beneath the tower stone, hidden where moss tried to erase them. One novice, barely 17, just arrived from Chiang Rai, asked too many questions. "Why doesn't someone just take the bell down?" he said, his voice more frustration than fear. An older monk named Pra Arun turned slowly, his face lined not by age, but by experience. "You do not bury what still breathes, and that bell breathes." That night, Fanshai did not return to his kuti. He lit 3 candles, one for each night the bell had spoken, and placed them in a row. He did not chant, he did not pray. He only sat, watching the flames. Each flickered in its own rhythm. None danced in the wind, because there was no wind. And yet one flame bowed suddenly sideways, only for a breath, and returned to stillness. That night, as he lay down, Fanshai whispered to the ceiling, not in fear, not in longing, but in surrender. "If you must ring again, let it be now, let it be done." But the bell did not ring, it waited, and Fanshai knew then it would not ring on his command. It would ring on his readiness.
The river behind Wat Pai Lom was narrow, but it moved with purpose. It did not sing like the rivers in the north, nor roar like the floodwaters of the monsoon season. Instead, it murmured, low, steady, eternal. Its path curved gently around the base of the mountain like an arm cradling something sacred. The monks called it Mae Nam Jai, the river of the heart. It was here, in this quiet stretch of flowing water, that the ashes of monks who passed in meditation were offered back to the world. No urns, no names carved in stone, only a whisper of smoke, a scatter of gray, and the soft sound of water folding the dead into its current. Fanshai stood by the riverbank just after sunrise, his sandals sinking slightly into the damp clay. Mist still clung to the surface of the water like breath too shy to leave. He had come alone. He had not told the abbot. The bell had not rung again, but in his dreams the river had spoken, and it had shown him faces, familiar ones. He knelt beside the slow-moving current and cupped water into his hands. Cool, clear, unremarkable. And yet, it shimmered strangely in the morning light. Not bright, not magical, but soft, like something remembered. As he watched, ripples broke the surface, though no stone had fallen. The reflection changed, not his own, but another face, older, mouth smiling, eyes closed. Sang Tien, the monk whose body had been found seated upright in the hall. Fanshai blinked, and the reflection returned to his own weathered face. He leaned closer, heart still steady, but breath a little thin. The water lapped gently at the edge of the stone slab where monks knelt during cremation rites. A leaf floated by, a dried Bodhi leaf, its veins like threads of memory. He whispered, "What did you see, brother?" The wind moved through the trees, but the river had no answer. He stayed there long into the morning. When the sun had fully risen, Fanshai rose and followed the riverbank upstream, walking barefoot across roots and stone until he reached the sacred bend, where the water curled around a rock shaped like a seated figure. Here, offerings were sometimes left, small lotus buds, strips of saffron cloth tied around tree trunks, and incense sticks burned low in the soil. But today, there was more. A robe, folded neatly, undisturbed, darkened at the collar as though worn by someone who had knelt in dew for many nights. Beside it, a string of beads, blackened but warm to the touch. Thanchai picked them up slowly. They hummed faintly in his hand, as if remembering the fingers that had turned them in silence. He sat beneath the fig tree and began to chant, not for the dead, but for the uncertain, not for the past, but for the space between breaths. His voice was low, soft, shaped by decades of devotion. It did not echo, it barely disturbed the mist. But the moment he fell silent, the river beside him shifted. Not the surface, but something beneath. A shape moved through the depth. Not fish, not leaf, not shadow. And then, clarity. A face rising just beneath the surface, not breaking it, as if staring up through glass. This time, Precha, the monk who vanished. His mouth did not open, his eyes did not blink, but Thanchai felt it, a presence, a watching. He whispered again, "Why are you here?" The ripples rippled, and the image was gone. He rose, knees stiff, breath caught like silk in the throat. He looked around. The tree swayed. A bird called once, then fell quiet. And then he saw it. Carved into the bark of the tree, 3 vertical lines. Faint, worn, but unmistakable. Thanchai traced them with a trembling finger. Not scratches, not chance. 3 lines, 3 tolls. He turned back to the river. It was just water now, moving, forgetting. But Thanchai could not forget. Back at the temple, the novices were finishing their midday chores when they saw him return. Wet robes, bare feet, eyes full of something they did not understand. Pra Arun, the elder monk who rarely spoke to anyone outside morning chant, approached him and bowed low. "Did you visit the bend?" he asked quietly. Thanchai nodded. Pra Arun looked at the beads in his hand. His voice grew even softer. "I once found those too, when I was young, when I saw the third face." Thanchai stared. "You heard it?" Pra Arun nodded once. "It did not call me, but I saw it call another, and I learned to stay away." He looked toward the bell tower in the distance. "The river remembers, but only for those who have been forgotten." Thanchai lowered his gaze. That night, he returned to the river, not to ask questions, not to see faces, but to leave something behind. He placed the beads into the water. He tied a knot in his robe over the heart and whispered a verse. "Let go what clings, let drift what must. Return, and may you forget my name." The river carried the beads away, but the sound they made as they tapped gently against a submerged stone was like a bell, a small, hollow bell that no one else heard. The chanting hall of Wat Phai Lom was the oldest building in the monastery. Its wooden pillars leaned ever so slightly inward, as though bowing to the weight of the countless prayers sung beneath its roof. The floorboards carried the echo of chanting from monks long turned to ash, their voices layered in memory like incense smoke clinging to old robes. Tanchai stepped inside just after twilight. The novices had finished sweeping. The mats were aligned. The scent of candle wax clung gently in the air. All seemed ordinary, except for the faint tremor running through Tanchai's spine, a whisper that had followed him since the river. The hall felt different tonight. Not empty, not silent, but waiting. He walked slowly to the far left corner, where a small alcove held a cracked wooden bowl and a folded saffron cloth. Dust had settled thickly on both. The cloth belonged to a monk named Fra Mongkol. Tanchai remembered him. Mongkol had been young, too young to carry the heaviness of meditation, but old enough to try. He had chanted beautifully. His voice was gentle, pure, honey-soft in the dim hall. It was said he could recite an entire sutra without pausing for breath, until one night he walked out mid-chant, just stood up, mid-verse, stepped away from the chorus of voices, and never returned. Some said he had wandered into the jungle. Some said he had simply disappeared. Others whispered that he heard something during meditation, something that pulled him away like a tide. Tanchai sat where Mongkol had once sat, feeling the floor still faintly worn beneath his knees. He closed his eyes. He breathed. And then he heard it. At first, just the sound of memory, monks chanting in a chorus he had known for decades. Their voices rose and fell like the slow tide of a calm sea, each syllable smooth and warm. But then the familiar sound thinned. One voice, only one, continued the chant. A younger voice, soft, hopeful, bright. Mongkol. Tanchai's eyes remained closed, but the air changed. It grew colder, pressing gently against his cheek like a palm encouraging him to listen more closely. The voice continued. Takaruniko, the one who holds boundless compassion. Then it faltered. One breath, a pause too long, a hesitation that did not belong in any prayer. Tanchai whispered into the empty hall, "Why did you stop, Mongkol?" The voice vanished. The hall became suddenly heavy, so still that even the candles seemed to dim. Tanchai opened his eyes. A shape was standing near the main altar. Not a monk, not a visitor. A silhouette, robed but barefoot, head bowed, hands clasped in front of him. Tanchai tried to speak, but the air caught in his throat. The silhouette lifted its head, not quickly, not dramatically, slowly, as though it had all the time in the world, and then it was gone. Only the candle flame nearest to the altar quivered. Tanchai closed his eyes again, not in fear, but in understanding. Mongkol had not left, not completely. He rose from his place and walked toward the altar, each step deliberate. The boards creaked beneath him, their groans echoing louder than expected. When he reached the front, he found something that had not been there earlier. A prayer book, open on the stand. Its pages, yellow and thinning, held a single verse, unfinished, the ink trailing as though the writer had been pulled away mid-word. It was Mongkol's handwriting. Tanchai traced the final line with his fingertip. "When the bell calls, follow not with fear." And then nothing. Ink streak, empty space, silence. Tanchai whispered in the empty hall, "What did you hear?"
that night, brother." As if in response, one of the candles blew out. No wind, no footsteps, but the flame died with certainty as though snuffed by an unseen hand. Tanchai felt something shift in the air behind him. He turned. A water bead rolled down the pillar, just one, falling as slowly as a tear. Rain had not touched the hall in weeks. He touched the pillar, cold. He bowed deeply, forehead to the floorboards. He whispered a prayer for Mongkol, a prayer for those who leave before the verse is finished, for those who step away not out of fear, but because they hear a sound no one else can hear. When he rose again, he saw footprints leading to the open doorway. Bare, small, still wet, as if someone had walked in from the river. He followed them to the threshold, and there, resting on the top step, was a single lotus petal, folded into the shape of a closed eye. Tanchai picked it up with trembling hands. "Brother," he whispered, voice cracking gently, "are you warning me or guiding me?" The hall remained silent, but the wind outside shifted, carrying with it the faintest tremor of metal, so soft it could have been imagination. But Tanchai knew better. The bell had stirred. Even if it had not rung, it had recognized him, or claimed him, or remembered him. He placed the lotus petal inside his robe and stepped into the night. The chanting hall behind him exhaled, the kind of breath a place releases when a memory had returned. The villagers who lived below Wat Pai Lom seldom spoke of the bell. They knew it well. Every child had once dared a glance at it through temple gates. Every elder had bowed before it during festivals, but they did not speak of it, not when lighting incense, not when passing beneath its shadow, not even when its voice echoed, faint and far, as though mourning someone yet to die. But the bell had not always hung there. It had been brought, carried by 10 men, years before the oldest novice was born, and hoisted into place with great ceremony. A gift, the temple records said, a sacred offering, a symbol of harmony between kingdom and sangha. But not everything recorded in ink survives as truth. Some truths live only in whisper. Tanchai heard one such whisper in the stillness of afternoon rain. He had walked to the edge of the village, robes damp, cane tapping the earth softly. There, in a stilted home built of cracked teak and quiet ghosts, lived the last bellmaker's grandson. His name was Noi. Noi no longer shaped metal. He shaped memory, one sip of tea at a time, retelling stories no one asked for. His eyes were clouded by age, but his voice, though thin, carried the weight of things passed down in fear, not pride. He invited Tanchai to sit. The tea was bitter, fragrant with lemongrass and smoke. They spoke of weather, of jasmine trees, of knees that no longer bent easily. And then, gently, Tanchai asked, "Your grandfather, he forged the bell?" Noi grew still. The rain slowed against the roof. Then he nodded, once. "He did not wish to," he said. Tanchai remained silent. Noi continued. "They came from the capital, said the old bell had cracked, said a new one must be cast. My grandfather was the best, but he had stopped making bells by then. His hands shook, his wife had died. He said no more iron, no more fire." Noi looked toward the distant outline of the mountain. But they offered gold, promised merit, promised his name would be carved at the base. He agreed? Thunchai asked. Noi shook his head. They didn't wait. He explained. The soldiers brought bronze, scraps from broken weapons, bits of old statues, sacred and profane, all melted together. But something else had come too. An urn, sealed in wax, wrapped in cloth, given to Noi's grandfather with quiet instruction. As it is mixed into the mold, they said, do not open it, do not ask. He didn't. He cast the bell, and when it cooled, when it was pulled from the mold and polished, something strange happened. The workshop, full of noise for generations, grew quiet. Too quiet. The crickets stopped. The dogs outside whined and ran, and the bell, just sitting there, gave off heat. For 3 days, the bell maker refused to sleep. He said he could hear chanting from inside the bronze. Not loud, not clear, just there. A chant he could not understand, a language no one had spoken in centuries. And then he began to change. He stopped eating. He stopped speaking. One morning, Noi's father found him kneeling before the bell, eyes open, mouth moving soundlessly. When they moved the bell to the temple, the bell maker did not resist. He followed, barefoot, unshaven, silent. They placed the bell in the tower. He returned home, and he never spoke again. Thunchai sat in stillness. What was in the urn? He asked softly. Noi's hand trembled. They say it was ashes. Thunchai's breath caught. Ashes of whom? Noi looked up, tears threading the corners of his cloudy eyes. Of a monk who should never have been cremated. Silence settled between them. Thunchai whispered, "Why?" They say he broke his vow. Not a sin of flesh, but something deeper. He spoke a prayer that was forbidden, a chant reserved only for the gods. They say it opened something, called something. Thunchai bowed his head. He had felt it, heard it. The voice inside the bell was not the sound of bronze against air. It was the echo of that forbidden chant, a chant sealed in death and poured into metal. Thunchai stood. Noi did not ask him to stay. The story had been told. The tea had gone cold. The house watched him leave without a creak or complaint. Back at the monastery, dusk fell like ash from a slow fire. Thunchai walked to the bell tower, barefoot now. The abbot was already there. "I warned you not to look deeper," Prawisut said, voice low, eyes heavy. Thunchai nodded, "But I was already seen." The two monks stood beneath the bell as twilight deepened. Thunchai placed his hand once more on the bronze surface. The warmth was stronger now, pulsing, like breath. "He holds him," he said. The abbot did not reply. Thunchai closed his eyes. He heard it again, that same soft chant, not with ears, but with marrow, with memory. It was not sung, it was remembered. A prayer that looped in circles, never ending, never beginning. As if the soul inside the bell was still reciting it, endlessly, until someone listened long enough to understand. Thunchai opened his eyes. "I must finish it," he said. The abbot's voice shook. "You may not survive it." Thonchai smiled faintly. "That's not the question anymore." He stepped back from the bell. That night, the monks awoke to silence deeper than anything they had ever known. Even the bell did not dare ring. But in Thonchai's kuti, the candles lit themselves. 1, 2, 3, and the shadows on the wall moved, not with the wind, but with the rhythm of a chant that no one alive could finish yet. No bell in the kingdom was ever meant to ring more than once in a monk's lifetime. Once meant warning. Twice meant awakening. But thrice was the call that did not echo outward, but inward. Not toward the ears, but toward the soul. Thonchai woke on the 7th morning since the first toll, long before the other monks stirred. He did not feel rested, not because he had slept poorly, but because the world around him no longer felt real. The floor beneath his feet felt like paper. The mat on which he sat folded under him as if unwilling to hold his weight. Even his breath, once firm and steady, came now like smoke, there and then gone. He wrapped his robe carefully, smoothed it with trembling fingers, and stepped out into the courtyard. The morning light had not yet warmed the stone tiles. The banyan leaves hung heavy with dew. The mist had not lifted, and neither had the heaviness in his chest. The first bell had been heard in solitude, the second in memory. The third, he felt it before it came, as if the sky itself grew still in reverence. A pause in the bird song, a tightening in the air, a hush not of silence, but of listening. Then, soft as sorrow, it rang. A single, long chime, deeper than before, as if struck from within the earth. Thonchai's knees gave out. He collapsed, not with fear, but with gravity, as if his bones remembered something his mind did not. He lay against the courtyard stone, eyes open, watching the clouds drift like funeral cloth across the pale sky. The bell fell silent, but the echo did not. It moved within him. Not sound, not memory, but cold. The kind of cold that comes not from outside, but from the quiet shutting of a door within. He tried to rise. His arms shook. His breath felt shallow, as though his lungs no longer belonged to him. The abbot found him there moments later, kneeling with both palms pressed to the stone as if praying without words. "Thonchai," the abbot whispered. The old monk did not look up, but he spoke. It rang. I heard it. Prawisuk closed his eyes. 3 times? Thonchai nodded. His lips were pale. "I think I am no longer warm." They carried him back to his kuti, not because he could not walk, but because the ground beneath him no longer recognized his steps. He did not resist. He folded his hands gently over his chest and whispered prayers that no one else could hear. That afternoon, as the sun reached its highest point, Thonchai asked to be placed in the meditation hall. "I wish to sit where the others did," he said. The monks prepared the space. The candles were lit. The altar was cleaned. A white mat was laid beneath the central window, where light pooled like milk spilled in silence. Thonchai sat in lotus position. His back was straight, his eyes were open. He did not blink. The novices gathered in doorways, watching with reverence and fear. Prawisut stood beside the window, hands clasped tight. The abbot placed a folded cloth across Tanchai's knees. "You may not return from this," he said gently. Tanchai smiled faintly. "I am not trying to return. I am trying to remember." As the day wore on, the wind picked up outside. It brushed through the temple trees, rustling the bamboo screens, lifting corners of ancient tapestries. Inside, the chanting hall grew darker, though the sun remained. Tanchai did not speak again. But the cold grew. It crept from his fingers to his chest, not biting, not cruel, but simply final, as though a door inside had been opened and something sacred had been allowed to pass. As the shadows lengthened across the floor, something strange occurred. The candle flames in the meditation hall bent backward, not with wind, but with breath, as though something had exhaled from within the bell tower itself. The monks who stood in quiet attendance turned their heads, first toward the doorway, and then, instinctively, toward the bell, though it was far, though it had not rung again. They felt it. A presence, watching, calling, not in words, not in sound, but in stillness. And in that stillness, Tanchai whispered a final phrase, just loud enough for those closest to hear. "I remember where the prayer ends." Then he closed his eyes, and his breath stopped. No gasp, no struggle, only peace, as if the body had simply let go, like a leaf detaching from a branch, already having said goodbye. But the most unsettling part was not his death. It was what happened next. The air in the hall grew warm again. Not hot, not uncomfortable, but warm, like flesh, like breath. The candles calmed, the monks remained still. Then, from somewhere deep within the temple, a low, melodic hum rose. Not a voice, not a chant, but the sound of a bell, ringing again and again. Not with dread, but with gratitude. Not with warning, but with release. As if it too had finished a long-forgotten prayer and could now rest. The death of Tanchai did not feel like a departure. It felt like an inhalation that had never been released. No thunder struck, no bell rang aloud in mourning. The skies remained unbroken, the wind soft. And yet, something in the temple had changed, something too quiet to name. The morning after his passing, the monastery awoke late, not from laziness nor grief, but from reverence, the kind of reverence that makes even breath feel like a disturbance, the kind that settles over the shoulders like dust in the folds of old scripture, subtle, steady, and inescapable. The novices walked slower. The brooms moved softer across the tiles. Even the birds that nested in the temple rafters chirped less. And when the hour came for morning chanting, the hall remained only half full. Prawisut, the abbot, sat at the front, his head bowed, his hands unmoving. No call to begin was spoken. No bell was struck to signal the start. But still, the monks chanted, quietly, tentatively. Their voices did not rise, they did not seek to fill the space, but merely to offer sound gently, like one lays a flower before a tomb. For the first time in many years, no one struck the drum. For the first time since living memory, no one dared light incense before the great bronze bell, because the silence around it felt alive now, not haunted, but aware. Pra Arun stood just beyond the edge of the courtyard, near the line where stone gave way to earth, watching the bell tower from afar. His breath came shallow. His hands, clasped before him, trembled faintly. He had seen Tanchai's face after death. There was no fear in it, no pain, but also no closure, just stillness, as if he had stepped beyond something no living person could follow. And yet, he left behind no chant, no written passage, no final words of teaching, only silence. Later that day, the monks prepared the rites. Tanchai's body was not to be burned, not yet. The abbot had requested a delay. 3 days, he said softly. Let the bell rest first. So they placed him in the meditation hall, draped in white, surrounded by lotus petals and sandalwood. Novices bowed as they passed the doorway, not daring to glance inside. Even the cats that prowled the temple grounds paused before crossing the threshold. One meowed softly, then turned away. That evening, the chanting resumed, but something had shifted in the rhythm. Verses faltered, cadences slipped. It was not forgetfulness, it was caution, as if the monks feared that chanting too clearly, too loudly, might awaken something or someone who now lingered just beyond the edge of hearing. Prawisut stood at the edge of the hall. His gaze drifted to the window, where once Tanchai sat, where now only shadows moved. After the final chant, no one spoke. The candles were left burning longer than usual. The wax ran in quiet rivers across the altar stones. Outside, the bell tower glowed faintly in the moonlight, unmoving, untouched, and yet different. Something about its presence had become heavier, not to the eye, but to the soul. That night, several novices dreamed of Tanchai, not in fear, but in confusion. In every dream, he stood in the river, ankle-deep in water, holding something in his hands, a folded cloth, a lotus petal, or, in one case, a bell small enough to fit in a child's palm. But he said nothing. He only watched, and the river, though gentle, carried no reflection. The next morning, those same novices refused to enter the chanting hall alone. Pra Arun did not scold them. Instead, he took the first incense stick and placed it at the door of Tanchai's kuti. No prayer, just presence. The temple fell into a rhythm of quietness. Routines remained, but voices softened. Chores were done, but without song. Even laughter, once common among the younger monks, vanished like mist before it could form. And in this quiet, something else was heard. A hum, so soft that no one could say for certain when it started. It did not come from the bell, nor from the chanting hall, but from the air itself, from beneath the earth, from within. It was not threatening, it was not music, it was memory. One morning, Just after sunrise, the abbot found a note beneath his door. It had no signature, only a single line. He finished a prayer that was never his. The abbot read it twice, then burned it. And when he stood before the bell that evening, hands clasped, eyes lowered, he whispered into the silence, "Then let him rest." The bell did not ring, but it vibrated, a shiver, a breath, a soundless chime only the bones could feel. The next morning, Tanchai's body was cremated by the river. Only 5 monks attended. Pra Wisut, Pra Arun, 3 novices. The fire took slowly, then steadily. No birds flew overhead, no wind disturbed the smoke. And when the ashes were gathered, the abbot did not scatter them into the current. He poured them into a sealed jar, then carried them alone back to the bell tower. There, at its base, beneath the coiled roots of the banyan tree, he dug a hollow, placed the jar inside, and whispered, "Not in temple, not in shrine, but where the bell can listen." He covered it with soil, pressed his palms together, and wept. Not for Tanchai's death, but for the silence that had followed. The silence after chanting. The monks had resumed their daily rhythms, but not one among them could say they felt the same. The rice still boiled, the floors were still swept, the scriptures were still chanted at dawn, but each motion now felt watched, not by eyes, but by absence, an absence that hovered behind every corner like a robe left to dry and forgotten. The bell had not rung again, but in its silence a presence remained. The novices noticed it first. Small things, a robe folded when they were sure they had left it rumpled, a water bowl filled though no one had carried the jug, a candle flickering to life when no match had been struck. And then the offerings. It began with incense, a single stick, lit, placed upright in the small altar beside Tanchai's kuti. The wind that morning had not stirred. No one admitted to lighting it. No one claimed to have prepared it, but it burned steadily, as if guarded by unseen hands. Then came the fruit, a single lychee, perfect, unbruised, placed on a folded cloth. With it, a small wooden bead, cracked down the center, yet warm to the touch. By the 3rd morning, 3 lotus petals were found arranged on the step, one folded, one open, one shaped like a flame. Pra Amarmun gathered the novices and asked if anyone had left the offerings. None had. He asked again, calmly, firmly. Still no hands were raised, and so he left them. Perhaps, he reasoned, the offerings were not for the dead at all. Perhaps they were for the living. That evening, Pra Wisut entered the chanting hall alone. He did not carry his staff. He did not bring his bowl. He brought only a single question and placed it on the altar before him, wordless. Why does he linger? He knelt there in silence, waiting for an answer he did not expect to come in sound. And it did not. But it came. A breath moved through the hall, not wind, not voice, but memory. A hush, soft and warm, that passed across his shoulders like a robe gently placed. The abbot closed his eyes, and in that stillness he understood.
Thonchai had not stayed to haunt. He had stayed to finish, to complete what had begun long before his first breath, to carry a sound across lifetimes, one verse at a time, until the bell could sleep. The next day the novices returned from alms round and found a fresh rice bowl at the altar near the bell tower. Not a ceremonial offering, a real one, still warm, still steaming. No one knew who cooked it. No monk admitted placing it, but it sat upon a folded cloth woven from threads of white, red, and saffron, the old colors of mourning. That afternoon a soft knock came at Pra Arun's kuti. A village woman stood in the sun, hands clasped tightly. She bowed low and spoke. "I had a dream," she said. "The monk in the mountain, he smiled at me. He told me not to be afraid. He told me where to leave the food." She had never met Thonchai. She did not know his name, but she described him precisely. The abbot allowed the food to remain. From then on the offerings came steadily. A folded leaf, a string of mala beads, once even a sandal, old, worn, a size too small for any living monk, each item placed with care, not with fear, but with affection, as if the spirit that now walked the temple paths was not a ghost, but a guardian. And yet, something about the air had grown colder again, not in cruelty, but in nearing. One novice confessed a strange dream. He stood by the bell, the sun setting, and Thonchai appeared beside him. The monk smiled, bent low, and whispered, "Tell them I will ring it once more." The novice woke, shaking. Pra Wisut did not dismiss it. He nodded slowly and walked to the bell tower that night, barefoot, silent. He sat beneath the bell and waited. The moon rose. The leaves stirred. The stars blinked through clouds. The bell did not ring, but a lotus petal fell from above, though no tree grew nearby. He caught it in his palm. It was wet. With what? He did not know. Tears? Rain? The weight of something sacred? He brought it to the altar and placed it beside the other offerings. He did not chant. He did not pray. He simply said, "We see you, and we will carry the rest." That night, every candle in the temple burned low at the same moment, not extinguished, just bowed, as if acknowledging something passing, or something watching, or something waiting.
Long before Thonchai ever walked barefoot on temple stone, before the old abbot's beard had gone to snow, and before the bell had found its place in the tower, there was a monk whose name was only half remembered, Pra Samet, the funeral singer. He did not chant the way the others did, not with rhythm, not with restraint. He sang. His voice, villagers whispered, could carry across rivers, bending branches and stilling birds. When he opened his mouth during rites, even the wind seemed to kneel. He sang for the sick. He sang for the dying. And sometimes, they say, he sang to the already gone. No one knew who had trained him. Some said he'd come from a monastery that burned down in a storm. Others believed he'd once taken a vow of silence so long and so deep that his voice had returned blessed, gifted, not earned. What is known is how he disappeared, and how the bell has never sounded the same since. Thonchai first heard his name spoken in hushed tones during his novice years, when two monks passed beside the bell tower and paused mid-conversation. "You remember the one who sang for the ghosts? Shh, don't speak of him too loudly. He's part of it now." At the time, Thanchai had not understood, but now, many years and 3 tolls later, he could feel the truth woven into those words. Part of it now. He returned to the library, not to search, but to be found. Sometimes, in places filled with memory, the past does not wait to be uncovered. It reveals itself when the air is still and the question is ready. Thanchai sat in the shadows between scrolls and silence and let his breath slow. He closed his eyes. He whispered once, "Pra Samet." A page turned, not by hand, by something older. On the far end of the shelf, a small stack of bundled notes shifted in the breeze that had not entered. One parchment slid slightly forward, just enough to expose a title. Voices Beyond Fire, the Songs of Final Mercy. He opened it. There were no teachings, no sermons, only verses. Long, flowing lines of script, lyrical, soft, words shaped like songs. Some had been smudged, some written over, but one, near the middle, had been circled in red ink. To sing for the restless dead, one must become less flesh than breath. Between bells toll and ashes fall, the chant must not be left unfinished. Thanchai read the lines aloud, not loudly, not reverently, but the way a man calls home the part of himself that wandered off in a dream. And then a sound rose from nowhere, a hum, low, gentle, familiar. Not a bell, not a wind, but a voice. A voice that sang not into the air, but through it. Thanchai turned slowly, and there, by the doorway of the library, stood a shape, clothed in saffron, eyes closed, lips parted. No movement, no breath, but song. The voice passed through walls, through time, through bones. Thanchai stood, trembling not from fear, but from recognition. The voice had no tongue. It was the voice of memory, of prayer offered in moonlight, of names sung so the dead would not walk lost. "Pra Samet," Thanchai whispered. The figure lifted its chin. The song paused, and then it stepped back into the darkness, dissolving like candle smoke. Only one note lingered, a single sustained tone, perfect, unending. Thanchai followed it to the bell tower. By the time he arrived, the tone had faded, but the air still hummed with its echo. The bell swayed, once, just once, though no wind passed. Pra Arun found him there, standing alone, palm pressed against the bronze. Thanchai turned to him. "He's still singing," he said. Pra Arun bowed his head. "Then we are not yet finished." That night, the chanting hall was left open. A candle was placed at the altar, but no one dared light it. And yet, when morning came, it burned brightly. Beside it, a single thread of saffron cloth had been tied into a loop. It resembled a mouth, or perhaps an open bell. Word passed among the monks slowly that Pra Samet, the funeral singer, had never truly left, that his voice had been sealed inside the bell, that each toll was not just a call, but a song, unfinished, repeating, echoing through the one who was chosen to hear it. Thanchai had not been cursed. He had been chosen to hear the last line, and perhaps to sing it. That evening, Pra Wisud summoned the monks. He lit incense not at the altar, but beneath the bell,
and spoke for the first time in many days. If the voice lingers, let it sing. If the bell breathes, let it speak. If the prayer is unfinished, let us be the breath that ends it. They sat in silence, facing the tower, waiting not for the bell to toll, but for the voice to return. And when it did, in the hush before moonrise, they sang together, low, sacred, not in fear, not in mourning, but in offering, as if saying to Pra Samet, "We have heard you, you may rest."
There comes a point in the stillness of a monk's journey when silence becomes more than peace, it becomes weight. Thon Chai no longer walked with sound. His feet brushed the earth without disturbing it. The leaves did not move when he passed. The birds in the trees no longer stirred. Even the air, it seemed, bent around him rather than through him. He had become translucent, not to the eye, but to the world. The other monks watched from the corners of courtyards, beneath overhangs, behind folded palms. No one called his name, no one touched his robe, and yet they bowed more deeply when he passed, not in reverence, not in fear, but in farewell. They sensed it now. He was nearing. But nearing what? No one dared to ask. Thon Chai felt it too. It was in the way food no longer tasted, in the way his hands no longer felt cold, even in the wind, in the way he began to forget the name he was given at birth. That morning he walked to the river, the same path he had taken as a novice, the same path he had taken when he first heard the bell, when he first saw the faces in the water. But this time, he was not looking for them. He was looking for himself. The river was calm, shallow, smooth as silk stretched across a basin of stone. Its surface shone in the morning light, golden and silver in turns. Thon Chai knelt. He leaned forward to drink and saw nothing, no reflection, no face, no eyes, no outline of his head beneath the rippling sky. Only the water, only the sky. He blinked. Still nothing. His fingers dipped into the surface. The ripples spread outward, circles echoing across memory, but no image looked back. He whispered, "Am I already gone?" The river answered only in motion. Leaves passed by. A petal drifted from the jungle edge and sailed over the spot where his reflection should have been. It did not hesitate. Water, he thought, only reflects what still belongs to this world. He cupped some into his hands and drank. It was cool, but it did not quench. The thirst was not in the body. It was in the soul. A soft wind passed, and then a voice. Not heard, but felt. Like warmth behind the eyes, like chanting without sound. When you no longer cast shadow or reflection, you are no longer bound by this shape. Thon Chai looked around. No one was there, but the words lingered. He stood slowly, and as he did, the breeze stirred behind him. He turned. A boy stood on the path, wearing novice robes, small, barefoot. His hands were folded. Thon Chai had not heard him approach. The boy bowed. Tanchai, he said softly. The abbot asked for you. Tanchai studied him. What is your name, child? The boy smiled faintly. You gave it to me, on my first day. Tanchai frowned, and then remembered. A quiet boy, newly arrived, frightened. He had placed his hand on the child's shoulder and whispered, "You will grow into your name." He had forgotten. The boy had not. Tanchai nodded. Lead the way. They walked back through the trees in silence. When they reached the temple steps, the boy paused. Do you still hear it? He asked. Tanchai looked toward the bell tower. Yes, he said, but not with ears. The boy bowed and left. Inside the main hall, the abbot waited, seated in stillness. Tanchai entered and bowed deeply. Prawishut raised his eyes. You didn't see yourself, did you? Tanchai did not ask how he knew. No, he said softly. Not even a flicker. The abbot nodded. Then it is nearly time. Tanchai sat across from him. For a long while they did not speak. The shadows of the pillars lengthened. Dust shifted in golden rays of light. Outside, a single bird called, then fell quiet. Do you fear it? The abbot asked. Tanchai shook his head. No, he said. I feared the forgetting, not the leaving. And now? I do not fear forgetting anymore. Only unfinished song. Prawishut lowered his gaze. You have carried the chant well. Tanchai looked to the altar. I did not write it. No, the abbot said, but you heard it. That night, Tanchai returned to the river once more. He did not drink. He did not kneel. He stood, and this time he did not look for reflection. Instead, he whispered into the water, You may forget my face, but let the ripples remember my breath. The water shimmered faintly, as if acknowledging the vow. Behind him the bell tower stood still in the moonlight, but something in the air had changed. Not movement, not sound, but an expectation. The kind that comes before a final note. The kind that waits for a last breath. There is a silence in the last hour before dawn that does not belong to night and has not yet been granted to morning. It is not the quiet of rest, nor the hush of sleep. It is the stillness of decision. The bell waited in that hour. So did the sky, and so did Tanchai, seated alone beneath the tower, wrapped in his robes, breath invisible in the cold. His hands rested gently on his lap. His eyes, though open, no longer clung to form. He did not blink. He did not need to. His heart beat, but he felt no weight in his chest. His body sat upon the stone, but his bones no longer called it home. He was there, and nearly gone. Above him, the bell had not swayed in hours. It hung perfectly still. Yet the air beneath it shimmered faintly, like heat rising from a candle that was not lit.
Prawisut stood some distance away, in the shadow of the garden wall. He did not approach, he did not speak. This moment was not his. This hour belonged to the bell, and the bell belonged to Ton Chai. The wind stirred, soft as breath on glass. It carried with it a scent, not of incense nor fire, but of river water and ashes. Ton Chai inhaled once, and then it began. A hum, low, soft. It rose not from the ground, not from the sky, but from within the bell itself, as if the bronze had remembered its own purpose, as if it had waited all this time not to call the world, but to sing its final note into a soul that was ready. The hum deepened, then toll. The bell rang, not violently, not loudly, but with weight, not of sound, but of meaning. It rang once, and the light in the sky changed. A thin silver ribbon stretched across the horizon. The leaves of the banyan tree stilled. The rooster in the lower village stirred, but did not crow. Time bent. Ton Chai closed his eyes. He did not fall, he did not breathe, but he smiled. And the silence that followed the toll was not empty. It was full of completion, of grace, of the prayer that had finally ended. Prawisut approached, barefoot on morning-wet stone. He stood before Ton Chai's seated form. The body remained upright, composed, silent, but no longer waiting. The abbot bowed deeply. A single tear touched the corner of his eye and vanished before it could fall. He turned to the bell and whispered, "You may rest now." No answer came. None was needed. As the first light of dawn spread across the stones, the monks emerged quietly from their kutis. They did not speak, they did not ask. They knew. The bell had rung for the last time, and not one of them had heard it, except Ton Chai. A novice stepped forward, hands trembling, and placed a single white petal at the base of the tower. It trembled for a moment in the cold breeze, then lay still. In the days that followed, no more incense was left by unseen hands, no more folded cloths, no more spectral songs in the hall. Only peace, only quiet, only the echo of a bell that would never ring again. And when, one morning, a village boy asked the abbot why the bell had gone silent, Prawisut knelt beside him and answered, "Because the one who heard it answered." The temple halls were quieter now, not with grief, but with grace. Ton Chai had passed not like a man falling into death, but like a flame bowing into wind. There was no moment of collapse, no struggle, no final gasp, just a gentle softening of breath, and then no breath at all. He had become still. And in that stillness, something sacred had unfolded. On the day after the final toll, Prawisut gathered the monks at dawn. No bell was struck, no gongs were sounded. Instead, the abbot carried a single wooden bowl to the center of the chanting hall. Within it, water, lotus petals, and a strip of saffron cloth from Ton Chai's robe. Around the bowl, he placed 5 candles, each one white, each one unlit. The monks entered in silence, robes rustling like distant leaves. They did not speak. They did not glance at the bell tower. They came not to mourn, but to accompany, to guide the flame that had risen from Thonchai's form toward the path it now walked, beyond breath, beyond shadow. They sat in a circle, and when all had gathered, the abbot began, not with words, not with sound, but with breath. A single deep inhale, followed by the hum of a chant that had not been spoken in the monastery for generations. Namo Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. The others joined, softly, evenly, their voices layering like river stones, building a path across water. This was not a chant for healing, nor for protection. It was not a plea. It was a farewell. A chant for the soul already halfway gone, for the one whose body remained still, but whose presence now touched more than stone and sky. The 5 candles flickered, not from wind, but from something unseen. A warmth, a presence. One by one the flames caught, quietly, without spark, as if the air itself had chosen to carry the light. The petals in the bowl moved in slow spirals. Somewhere, a monk wept, not for loss, but for beauty. The abbot's voice grew steadier, and the rhythm of the chant deepened. The monks did not rush. They did not repeat mindlessly. Each syllable was given breath, weight, meaning. Because this was no ordinary passing. Thonchai had not simply died. He had finished the chant left echoing in the bell for generations. He had carried it, wordless, through silence, through stillness, through the edges of reflection and breath, until the bell could finally rest. Until he could rest. And so the chant was not for Thonchai's salvation. It was for his departure. Not to plead for mercy, but to mark the moment the light chose to leave the wick. The sky outside slowly shifted from silver to gold. Morning light crept across the floor of the hall, bathing the seated monks in warmth. The bowl of petals gleamed. When the final line of the chant was reached, the abbot stopped speaking. So did the monks. No echo followed, just stillness, and the soft sound of the petals settling. Then Pra Arun stood. In his hands he held a folded bundle, Thonchai's final robe, cleaned and pressed. He walked slowly to the bell tower. There, without ceremony, he tied the cloth around the base of the bell, not to bind it, not to silence it, but to thank it. To thank the bell for remembering a name long after others had forgotten, and to thank Thonchai for answering. The cloth fluttered slightly in the breeze, and then lay still. That night, no dreams came to the monks, only sleep, deep, unbroken, gentle, as if Thonchai's spirit had left not only the body, but the burden, as if he had taken with him the hum, the weight, the echo of the unfinished chant. The candle flames did not dance, the wind did not cry, the bell did not hum. There was, at last, only peace.
Seasons shifted gently at Wat Pylon. The rains came and passed, washing the temple stone with silver tears. The leaves changed color, not with drama, but with quiet apology. The mist in the early mornings grew softer, lighter, like a blanket that no longer needed to protect. And still the bell stood, still, silent. Since Tunchai's final breath, it had not rung again, not once. To the villagers, it seemed as though the temple had grown more peaceful. Fewer questions were asked, fewer omens whispered. The monks walked with greater ease. The novices laughed again, if only gently. The weight that once sat in the shadows had lessened. But Prawisut knew better. Stillness, he had learned, did not always mean peace. Sometimes it meant listening. One morning, just before first light, a novice named Kema walked quietly through the courtyard. His sandals brushed against the stone as he carried water to the meditation hall. He had only been at the monastery 6 months, yet already he had learned the rhythm of its breath. He passed the bell tower without glancing at it, but something made him pause. A feeling. Not cold, not dread, but recognition. He turned and looked up. The bell did not move, but in that moment he realized something strange. His heart had begun to beat in rhythm, a slow, steady thrum, like a drum heard from deep underground. He blinked, placed his hand on his chest, and then heard it. A low hum, faint, almost imagined. Almost. He stepped closer. The bell did not move, but it knew he was there. He placed the water jar down, stood beneath it, and heard his name. Not aloud, not from a voice, but from within. Kema, soft, weightless, familiar. He stepped back, breath catching. He waited for sound, for sway, for sign. There was none. And yet, in his bones, he knew. He would never tell anyone, not for many years, not until he was old and the wind had silvered his brow. But in that moment, something passed between the bell and the boy. Not death, not fate, but inheritance. The bell no longer needed to ring aloud. Its voice had changed. Now it rang within. It had always done so. Only the dying ever truly heard it. Only the ones who were near enough to silence, to stillness, could feel the bronze call their name. Years passed. Wat Pylom aged, as all things do. Roofs were repaired, trees grew tall, monks came and left, each leaving behind the shape of their silence. But the bell remained, untouched, unrung, listening. There were nights when villagers claimed they saw a figure beneath the tower. Not a monk, not a ghost, just a shape, sitting cross-legged in the dark, breathing, waiting. Some said it was Tunchai. Others believed it was the bell itself, taking form, remembering the shape of those it had called. But the monks never spoke of it. They knew better, because all of them, at one time or another, had walked past that bell in the soft hush of dusk and felt it turn gently toward them, not with threat, not with sadness, but with the knowing of a name, a quiet promise. When it is time, you will hear me. And when the time comes, they do. Not through the air, not through the stone, not even through the ears, but through the space just behind the heart. A tremble, a breath, a memory. The bell tolls only once now. It no longer needs 3, because by the time you hear it, you are already ready. You are already leaving, and no one else will hear it. Not even the monk beside you, not even the wind, only you. And the silence that follows will not be empty. It will be your echo returning home.